At exactly 5:30 every morning, before the marble floors reflected the sunrise, 24-year-old Naomi Carter quietly unlocked the servants' entrance of the grand Ashford estate outside Charleston, South Carolina. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't connected to powerful families. To everyone inside that mansion, she was simply the new cleaning girl. Naomi tied her curly hair into a bun, slipped on worn sneakers, and pushed a blue bucket across the polished hallway. The house was enormous, 4 floors, priceless paintings, crystal chandeliers, and enough rooms that she still got lost after 3 weeks. The Ashfords were one of America's oldest billionaire families. But despite all the luxury, the house felt cold. No laughter, no warmth, only whispers about money, inheritance, and who would control Ashford Industries after the family patriarch died. Naomi stayed invisible. She preferred it that way. She had spent her whole life surviving by not attracting attention. Her mother had passed away when Naomi was 10. Her foster homes never lasted. By 16, she was working diners. By 20, she was sleeping in her car between jobs. Cleaning mansions wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep a tiny apartment and buy groceries. That was all she wanted. Or so she thought. One morning, while polishing the upstairs library, Naomi noticed an elderly man sitting alone beside the fireplace. He looked familiar. It was William Ashford himself, the billionaire founder, the man whose face appeared in business magazines. Except, he didn't look powerful anymore. His hands trembled. His breathing sounded weak. Most employees weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. Naomi quietly turned to leave. "Young lady." She stopped. "Yes, sir?" William smiled gently. "Would you play chess with an old man?" She blinked. "Me?" "My own children refuse." Naomi hesitated. "I only know the basics." "Perfect." For the first time in weeks, the billionaire laughed. Downstairs, William's eldest son, Richard Ashford, watched everything through the security cameras. He frowned. Why is father talking to the maid? His wife rolled her eyes. "He talks to anyone now." "No." Richard narrowed his eyes. "He never invites strangers." Something about Naomi bothered him. He couldn't explain why. Over the following weeks, William requested Naomi almost every afternoon. Sometimes chess, sometimes tea, sometimes simply conversation. Unlike everyone else, she never asked him for favors, never mentioned his fortune, never tried to impress him. She reminded him of someone he'd lost decades ago. One rainy afternoon, William suddenly asked, "Do you know your family?" Naomi looked down. "No. Parents. My mom died." "Father?" "I never knew him." William grew strangely quiet. "What was your mother's name?" Naomi smiled softly. "Grace Carter." The chess piece slipped from William's fingers. His face turned pale. "Grace." He whispered the name as though it belonged to another lifetime. Naomi noticed his expression. "Are you all right?" William forced a smile. "Yes." But inside, a 40-year-old memory had just come rushing back. That evening, William entered his private study. He unlocked a dusty wooden box hidden behind old books. Inside lay faded photographs. One picture showed a young woman smiling beside him. On the back were handwritten words. "Grace Bennett, summer 1998. His hands shook. "It can't be—" He immediately picked up the phone. "I need Detective Harris," the investigator answered. "It's been 26 years, Mr. Ashford." "I know. I need you to find someone." "Who?" William stared at Naomi's employee file. "A woman named Grace Carter. And if she's gone—" He swallowed hard. "Find her daughter." He had no idea. The daughter was already living under his own roof. The next morning, Naomi noticed something had changed. The servants whispered whenever she walked by. The head housekeeper suddenly assigned her to work only in Mr. Ashford's private wing. Even Richard Ashford stared at her longer than usual during breakfast. Naomi didn't understand why. She simply continued doing her job. Meanwhile, Detective Harris arrived at William Ashford's study carrying a thick folder. "I found something," he said. William leaned forward. "Tell me." Grace Carter wasn't always Grace Carter. William's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Her birth name was Grace Bennett. William closed his eyes. It was the same Grace, the woman he had loved nearly 30 years ago. The woman his wealthy parents had forced him to leave because they believed she was beneath the Ashford name. I searched further, Harris continued. Grace disappeared from public records after moving to Georgia. She worked several jobs and raised one child alone. William's voice cracked. The child! A daughter, William whispered. Naomi. Harris nodded. Everything points to her. William stared silently at the file. Years ago, Grace had written him one final letter. His father had hidden it. William never knew she had been pregnant. He never knew he had a child. Tears filled his eyes. I failed them both. That afternoon, Naomi brought William a cup of tea. She noticed his eyes were red. Were you crying? William smiled sadly. Sometimes old men cry over things they can never change. Naomi gently placed the cup beside him. My mom used to say that regret is heavier than any suitcase. William looked at her in amazement. Grace used to say almost the same thing. Naomi laughed softly. She had lots of little sayings. William wanted nothing more than to tell her the truth. To say, I'm your father. But before he could speak, the study door burst open. Richard entered without knocking. Father, we need to discuss tomorrow's board meeting. William sighed. It can wait. It cannot. Richard glanced coldly at Naomi. You. She stood immediately. I'll leave. After she walked out, Richard shut the door. What is this becoming? He demanded. Every employee says you're spending hours with that maid. William answered calmly. She's kind. Richard scoffed. She's manipulating you. William's expression hardened. No, she's the only person in this house who isn't. That evening, William called his attorney, Margaret Lewis. I've made my decision. The family won't like it. I know. You still want to proceed? William nodded. Prepare the documents. Margaret hesitated. This will change everything. That's exactly why it must be done. The following morning, William asked Naomi to meet him in the garden. She found him sitting beneath a large oak tree. I have something unusual to ask. Naomi smiled. What is it? William took a deep breath. My family believes I'm no longer capable of making decisions. She listened quietly. They're planning to force me into retirement and seize control of everything I've built. I'm sorry. They only care about the inheritance. Naomi didn't know what to say. Then William looked directly into her eyes. I need someone honest. Someone they don't expect. Naomi frowned. I don't understand. I want you to pretend to be someone. She blinked. What? William continued. I want you to pose as the woman I've chosen to inherit my estate. Naomi nearly dropped her coffee. Mr. Ashford? They're billionaires. They'll hate me. They already hate everyone who isn't rich. She shook her head. I can't. You can. I'm just a cleaner. William smiled gently. No, Naomi. You are far more than that. Naomi laughed nervously. This sounds like one of those movies where everything goes terribly wrong. William chuckled. It probably will. For the first time in years, they both laughed together. Then William grew serious. I'll pay you enough to change your life forever. Naomi looked at the mansion behind them. She didn't want money. She wanted peace. But her apartment landlord had just given her an eviction notice. Medical bills from her mother's final illness still haunted her. She had no family, no safety net. Finally, she whispered, If this helps you, I'll do it. Neither of them realized one unbelievable truth. Naomi wasn't pretending to be the Ashford heir. She already was. 3 nights later, the Ashford mansion hosted its annual family dinner. Every important member of the Ashford dynasty was there. Business partners, lawyers, board members, politicians, and every relative hoping to secure a larger piece of the billion-dollar fortune. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed freely. Conversation sounded polite. But beneath every smile was ambition. Then the grand staircase doors opened. Everyone turned. Naomi slowly stepped into the room. She wore a simple emerald green evening dress William had insisted she accept. She had never worn designer clothes before. She felt completely out of place. "I'm making a mistake," she whispered. William offered his arm. "No, they're the ones about to make one." Together they walked downstairs. The room fell silent. Richard Ashford frowned. His wife Victoria whispered, "Why is the maid dressed like that?" Their daughter Chloe laughed under her breath. "Maybe she's serving dessert." William reached the center of the ballroom and raised his glass. "Thank you all for coming." Everyone smiled politely. "I have someone I'd like you to meet." He turned toward Naomi. "This is Miss Naomi Carter." The room remained quiet. Then William added, "She is my personal guest, and someone I trust deeply." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Richard nearly dropped his drink. "What?" William continued calmly. "From this day forward, Naomi will be working closely with me on matters involving my personal affairs." Whispers spread instantly. "Who is she? Where did she come from? Is she his assistant?" "No. I heard she's one of the maids." Victoria smirked. "A cleaner advising a billionaire? How embarrassing." Naomi heard every word. Her cheeks burned, but she remembered William's advice. "Never let cruel people decide your worth." She stood tall. Dinner began. Naomi found herself seated beside William. Across the table sat Richard, Victoria, and the rest of the family. The tension was unbearable. Halfway through dinner, Victoria smiled sweetly. "So, Naomi, what university did you attend?" Naomi answered honestly, "I couldn't afford college." Several guests exchanged amused looks. Victoria nodded dramatically. "Oh, that's unfortunate." Richard added, "So what exactly qualifies you to advise my father?" Naomi calmly replied, "I'm not advising him. I'm simply helping when he asks." Richard laughed. "You expect us to believe that?" Before Naomi could answer, William placed his fork down. "What qualifies her?" "Integrity." Silence. William looked directly at Richard. "Something money can't buy." Richard's jaw tightened. After dinner, Naomi stepped outside onto the terrace to catch her breath. She stared at the stars, fighting back tears. Maybe she should quit. She didn't belong here. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "They're cruel, aren't they?" She turned. It was Ethan Brooks, William's longtime attorney's son and a young executive at Ashford Industries. Unlike the others, he smiled warmly. "My mother taught me that wealthy families often mistake kindness for weakness." Naomi laughed softly. "I've noticed." Ethan handed her a glass of sparkling water. "You handled yourself better than most CEOs would." "Really?" "They wanted you to lose your temper. You didn't." For the first time that evening, Naomi smiled. Inside the mansion, Richard was furious. He slammed the study door behind him. "This has gone too far." Victoria crossed her arms. "She's obviously after his money." Richard nodded. "We need proof." "What if there isn't any?" "There will be." He picked up his phone. "Hire someone. I want every detail of Naomi Carter's life. If she's hiding anything, we'll destroy her before father signs a single document." Meanwhile, William watched Naomi laughing quietly with Ethan through the window. His eyes filled with emotion. She looked so much like Grace. The same smile, the same gentle heart. He reached into his pocket and unfolded Grace's final letter. One sentence haunted him every day. "If you ever meet our child, promise me you'll love her for who she is, not for the Ashford name." William whispered to himself, "I failed you once, Grace. I won't fail our daughter again." But before he could reveal the truth, Richard's investigation had already begun. And buried in old adoption records was a secret that would shake the entire Ashford family to its core. The private investigator worked quickly. Within 48 hours, Richard Ashford had a thick file on Naomi Carter. He sat behind his office desk while Victoria impatiently waited. "Well," she asked. Richard opened the folder. "She has no criminal record." Victoria frowned. "No debts? Only old medical bills from her late mother's illness. No lawsuits. No hidden bank accounts. No wealthy boyfriend." Victoria sighed in frustration. "So she's actually honest?" Richard slammed the file shut. "Nobody is that perfect. There has to be something." Just then another envelope caught his eye. It was marked, "Confidential, Adoption Records." Richard slowly opened it. Inside was a copy of Naomi's birth certificate. The father's name was blank. Her mother's name read, Grace Bennett. Richard froze. Bennett. Victoria looked confused. Who? Richard stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. My father once mentioned a woman named Grace Bennett. The only woman Grandpa forbade him to marry. Victoria's eyes widened. You think? Richard immediately shook his head. No, it can't be. But why would the names match? For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Meanwhile, Naomi had no idea her past was being investigated. She was helping. William organized old family photographs in the mansion's library. Dust covered dozens of leather albums. William smiled as they turned the pages. These pictures remind me that money never kept a family together. Naomi nodded. My mom used to say memories are worth more than houses. William smiled sadly. Your mother was a wise woman. As Naomi reached for another album, something slipped from between its pages. A small silver locket landed on the floor. Oh! She picked it up. It's beautiful. William's face suddenly lost all color. The locket. He recognized it instantly. 30 years ago, he had given that exact locket to Grace on her birthday. Inside, he had placed a tiny handwritten note that read, Forever yours, William. His hands trembled. May I see it? Naomi handed it to him. I've had it since I was little. My mother told me never to lose it. William carefully opened it. The faded note was still inside. He could barely breathe. There was no longer any doubt. Naomi wasn't simply Grace's daughter. She was his daughter. Tears filled his eyes. Naomi noticed. Mr. Ashford, are you all right? He quickly closed the locket and forced a smile. It just reminded me of someone I loved a very long time ago. Naomi gently touched his shoulder. I think she'd be happy you still remember her. William had to look away so she wouldn't see him cry. That evening, William invited his attorney, Margaret Lewis, to the estate. I've confirmed it, he said quietly. Margaret looked at the locket. So Naomi is truly your daughter. William nodded. I wasted 24 years because my father hid Grace's final letter. Margaret placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You still have time. William sighed. I don't want Naomi to believe I ignored her. She deserves the truth. Then tell her. William stared out the window. I will. But first I must protect her. If Richard discovers the truth before I tell her, he'll do everything possible to destroy her. Unfortunately, Richard was already making his move. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting of the Ashford family. As everyone gathered in the grand living room, Naomi entered with a tray of coffee. Richard looked directly at her. His voice was cold. You can put that down. She smiled politely. Of course. Then Richard held up the adoption file for everyone to see. I think it's time we all learned who Naomi Carter really is. Naomi froze. William slowly stood from his chair. His heart pounded. The secret he had planned to reveal with love was about to be dragged into the light with cruelty. The grand living room fell silent. Every member of the Ashford family stared at Richard. Naomi stood frozen beside the coffee tray, her heart pounding. William slowly rose from his chair. Richard, he said firmly, this isn't the time. Richard ignored him. Oh, I think it's the perfect time. He held up the investigation file. I hired an investigator because I believed this woman was trying to manipulate our father. Naomi looked shocked. You investigated me? Richard didn't answer. Instead, he opened the folder. Naomi Carter, born to Grace Bennett, later known as Grace Carter. The room erupted in whispers. William clenched his fists. Richard continued. Does that name sound familiar, Father? William's silence said everything. Victoria's eyes darted between the two men. Richard, what are you talking about? Richard smiled grimly. Grace Bennett was Father's first love. Gasps echoed around the room. William closed his eyes. It was over 30 years ago. Richard turned toward Naomi. Congratulations. Whether you knew it or not, your mother once had a relationship with my father. Naomi's face turned pale. What? No, my mother never told me that. Richard shrugged. Maybe she had a reason. Naomi looked at William. Is this true? William stepped toward her. Yes. The single word felt heavier than the walls around them. Naomi whispered, My mother. Knew you? William nodded slowly. I loved her. Tears filled Naomi's eyes. Then, why weren't you there? William's voice broke. Because I never knew she was pregnant. He pulled a faded envelope from his pocket. My father intercepted every letter Grace sent. I only found this a few weeks ago. He handed Naomi the fragile letter. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Grace's handwriting filled the page. William, if you are reading this, then someone finally did the right thing. I'm carrying our child. I prayed every day that you'd come, but I believe you never received my letters. If fate ever brings you to our daughter, please don't let her grow up believing she wasn't loved. By the time Naomi reached the last sentence, she was crying. The room was completely silent. She looked up at William. You're my father? William nodded, tears streaming down his face. Yes. I'm so sorry, Naomi. I lost 24 years that should have belonged to us. Without thinking, Naomi stepped forward. William expected her to walk away. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him. Father and daughter stood in the middle of the mansion, embracing for the first time in their lives. Several employees quietly wiped away tears. Even some distant relatives looked emotional. But Richard wasn't moved. He slammed his hand on the table. This changes nothing. Everyone turned. William released Naomi and faced his son. It changes everything. Richard shook his head. She grew up outside this family. She knows nothing about running Ashford Industries. William answered calmly, Neither did I when I started. Character can be learned. Integrity cannot. Richard's anger boiled over. So you're giving my inheritance to a stranger? William's voice became firm. No. I'm giving part of my legacy to my daughter. Richard stared in disbelief. Then he laughed bitterly. This isn't over. He pointed at Naomi. You may have his blood, but this family will never accept you. Naomi wiped away her tears. She looked him directly in the eyes. I didn't come here for your money. I came here because your father asked for my help. If I wanted revenge for the years I lost, I'd already have it. The room fell silent again. Richard had no response. For the first time in his life, he realized the woman he had called just a maid possessed more dignity than anyone else in the room. But outside the mansion, another danger was already approaching. A ruthless rival company had learned about the Ashford family crisis, and they were preparing to strike while the family was divided. The morning after the shocking revelation, Ashford Industries was in chaos. News of William Ashford's long-lost daughter had somehow reached the media. Television reporters gathered outside the company's headquarters. Stock prices began to fall. Business channels speculated that the Ashford family was falling apart. Inside the executive boardroom, panic spread. Our biggest investors are demanding answers, one executive said. Another added, a rival company, Blackstone Global, has offered to buy millions of our shares. If they succeed, they'll gain control of the board. Richard slammed his fist on the table. This is exactly what I warned everyone about. He pointed toward Naomi, who had quietly entered with William. The moment she came into our lives, everything started collapsing. Naomi lowered her eyes. William stepped in front of her. No, Richard. This family was falling apart long before Naomi arrived. The room fell silent. Later that afternoon, William suddenly collapsed in his office. Mr. Ashford, Naomi cried. Employees rushed in as William clutched his chest. An ambulance arrived within minutes. At the hospital, doctors delivered difficult news. He suffered a mild heart attack. The stress has taken a serious toll. He'll recover, but he must avoid any emotional strain. Naomi sat outside his hospital room, blaming herself. If I hadn't come here, a gentle voice interrupted her. This isn't your fault. It was Ethan Brooks. He handed her a cup of coffee. My grandfather used to say families don't break because the truth comes out. They break because people hide it for too long. Naomi nodded silently. Back at Ashford Industries, Blackstone Global made its move. They secretly contacted several nervous shareholders. By evening, they had already purchased a large block of company stock. Margaret Lewis rushed to the hospital. William, We have a problem. William looked exhausted. How bad? If we lose just 6% more of the shares, Blackstone can force a vote to remove your family from control. William closed his eyes. We can't let that happen. But I'm stuck in this hospital bed. Naomi had been quietly listening. An idea came to her. My mom owned a small bookstore, she said softly. Everyone looked at her. When business was slow, she didn't hide from customers. She invited them in. She told them the truth. Margaret frowned. What are you suggesting? Naomi answered, Stop hiding. Hold a public press conference. Tell the truth before someone else twists it. Richard, who had just entered the room, laughed. A maid wants to teach billionaires about business. Naomi met his gaze calmly. No, I want to remind them that trust is worth more than stock prices. William smiled proudly. Do it! Richard stared in disbelief. You're trusting her with the company's future? William nodded. I trust my daughter. The next morning, reporters packed the lobby of Ashford Industries. Cameras flashed as Naomi stepped onto the stage beside Margaret Lewis. Millions watched the live broadcast. Naomi took a deep breath. I never asked to become part of the Ashford family. I never asked for wealth. My mother raised me to earn every dollar honestly. She paused. The truth is simple. I found my father only weeks ago, and he found the daughter he never knew he had. The room became completely silent. She continued. A family isn't made by money. It's made by forgiveness. My father isn't fighting to protect his fortune. He's fighting to protect the people who built it together. By the time she finished speaking, many reporters were wiping away tears. The story spread across America, not as a scandal, but as a remarkable reunion between a father and daughter, separated by decades of lies. Within hours, investor confidence began to recover. The company's stock stabilized. Blackstone's takeover attempt stalled. Even financial analysts admitted that Naomi's honesty had restored public trust. That evening, William watched the press conference from his hospital room. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, Grace, our daughter has your courage. But while the company had been saved, Richard had reached a breaking point. Consumed by jealousy and anger, he made a secret phone call to Blackstone's CEO. If I can't have Ashford Industries, I'll help you take it. The greatest betrayal was no longer outside the family. It had just begun from within. 3 days later, William Ashford returned home from the hospital. The doctors had warned him to avoid stress, but the moment he stepped into the mansion, he sensed something was wrong. Employees avoided eye contact. Executives whispered in the hallways. Margaret Lewis was waiting with a worried expression. We have confirmation, she said quietly. William frowned. Confirmation of what? Margaret handed him a folder. Our cybersecurity team intercepted emails. William opened the file. His hands began to shake. Every message came from Richard. He had secretly shared confidential company information with Blackstone Global. Board strategies, investor lists, internal financial reports. William could barely speak. My own son. Margaret nodded sadly. He betrayed the company. That afternoon, William called an emergency board meeting. Every director filled the conference room. Richard walked in confidently. He smiled as though nothing had happened. William looked at him for a long moment. Then he placed the printed emails on the table. Would you like to explain these? Richard's smile disappeared. The directors picked up the documents one by one. The room became silent. One elderly board member whispered, My God! Richard stood. You were spying on me? William answered calmly. No. You exposed yourself. Richard slammed his hands on the table. I did what had to be done. You chose her over your own family. William's voice remained steady. No. I chose honesty. You chose greed. Richard laughed bitterly. Greed? I spent 30 years building this company with you. And suddenly a daughter you met a month ago means more than I do? William's eyes filled with sadness. You were never competing with Naomi. You were competing with the man I hoped you would become. Richard looked away. For the first time, he had no argument. The board voted immediately. Every director raised a hand. Richard Ashford was removed as executive vice president. His voting rights were suspended pending legal action. Security officers quietly approached him. Sir, we've been instructed to escort you out. Richard stared around the room. No one defended him, not even Victoria. He slowly walked toward the door. As he reached it, he turned back. You'll regret this. Then he left. Late that evening, Naomi found William sitting alone in the garden beneath the old oak tree. The same tree where he had first asked her to pretend to be his heir. She sat beside him without saying a word. After several minutes, William sighed. I've lost my son. Naomi gently shook her head. No, you've lost his trust. There's still a difference. William looked at her. After everything he's done, you still believe he can change? Naomi smiled sadly. My mother taught me something. People don't become cruel overnight. They become hurt. One choice at a time. William wiped away a tear. You sound just like Grace. Meanwhile, Richard sat alone in a luxury hotel room overlooking the city. Blackstone's CEO called him. Our deal is ready. Richard stared out the window. If I help you take Ashford Industries, what happens to my father? The CEO answered coldly, he'll become yesterday's news. For the first time, Richard realized what he had done. He hadn't been hurting Naomi. He hadn't even been hurting William. He had placed thousands of employees' jobs and his own family's legacy at risk. He ended the call without saying another word. The next morning, Blackstone launched its final attack. They filed legal papers demanding an emergency shareholder vote to seize control of Ashford Industries. The hearing was scheduled for just 48 hours later. If William lost, everything his family had built over 4 generations would belong to someone else. As the legal notice arrived at the mansion, Naomi looked at her father. We've come too far to lose now. William nodded, but neither of them knew. The one person who could save Ashford Industries was the very man who had nearly destroyed it. 48 hours later, the largest courtroom in Charleston was filled to capacity. Reporters lined every wall. Employees from Ashford Industries packed the gallery. Thousands more watched the hearing live across the country. At stake wasn't just a company. It was a family's legacy. William Ashford walked in slowly, supported by a cane. Naomi walked beside him, not as a maid, not as a hired stranger, but proudly as his daughter. Across the room sat the executives from Blackstone Global. Their CEO wore a confident smile. We're ready, he whispered to his lawyers. The judge entered. This hearing will determine whether the proposed shareholder vote may proceed. Blackstone's attorneys argued that the Ashford family had become unstable and incapable of leading the company. The founder is in poor health. The family is divided. The company's future is at risk. When they finished, the judge turned to William. Mr. Ashford, your response? William slowly stood. Before he could speak, the courtroom doors suddenly opened. Every head turned. Richard Ashford walked inside. The room erupted in whispers. William stared in disbelief. Richard walked to the witness stand. I'd like to testify. Blackstone's CEO immediately stood. What are you doing? Richard ignored him. He faced the judge. I made a terrible mistake. I allowed jealousy to blind me. I shared confidential company information with Blackstone. They promised me power. But they never cared about my family, our employees, or the company my father spent his life building. The courtroom fell completely silent. Richard reached into his briefcase and handed over a flash drive. It contains every email, contract, and recorded conversation between me and Blackstone's executives. The judge reviewed the evidence. Blackstone's lawyers turned pale. Within minutes, the courtroom buzzed with shock. The evidence clearly showed that Blackstone had encouraged corporate espionage and manipulated shareholders to force a takeover. The judge struck the gavel. This court rejects Blackstone's petition. The evidence will be referred for further investigation. Cheers erupted throughout the courtroom. Ashford Industries had been saved. Outside the courthouse, Richard slowly approached William. I don't expect forgiveness. I just couldn't let them destroy everything you built. William looked at his son for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and embraced him. You finally chose what was right. Richard broke down in tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Naomi quietly wiped tears from her own eyes. She walked over and smiled gently. We can't change yesterday. But we can choose tomorrow. Richard looked at her. After everything I said to you, why are you still being kind? Naomi smiled. Because my mother taught me that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It gives the future a chance. Richard nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. I'm sorry, Naomi. For judging you. For hurting you. For seeing you as an enemy. Naomi hugged him. We're family. Let's start acting like one. 6 months later, Ashford Industries had fully recovered. Employee satisfaction reached its highest level in company history. William remained chairman, but he gradually entrusted more responsibility to a leadership team built on integrity rather than family politics. Richard completed counseling and earned back the trust of many employees by working alongside them, not in the executive suite, but on community projects funded by the company. Naomi refused a lavish executive office. Instead, she created the Grace Carter Foundation, named after the mother who had raised her with love despite every hardship. The foundation provided scholarships for foster children, single parents, and young adults struggling to afford college. At its opening ceremony, William unveiled a bronze statue of Grace. The inscription read, "She left this world with little wealth, but she gave her daughter a heart rich enough to change an entire family." William turned to Naomi. Your mother would be proud of you. Naomi smiled through tears, and she'd tell us to stop crying in public. Everyone laughed. For the first time in decades, the Ashford family wasn't held together by money. It was held together by truth, forgiveness, and love. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't a fortune. It's the courage to do what's right, even when it's the hardest choice. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps bring more emotional stories like this to life.